I just wanted to make a couple of comments and thank Jordan Carr for being here today. He came to speak with a few of us from council this evening. He's working on his citizenship in the community badge, and hopefully we were able to answer some questions sufficient enough that you'll get that badge. But very proud of you. Proud to have you as a Milton citizen.
Thank you. Will the city clerk please sound the next item?
Our first item is approval of the meeting agenda. Agenda item number 09888. Staff would like to recommend the following changes to tonight's agenda. First, we would like to postpone number 9, which is a public hearing on alcohol beverage license applications, to the July 20th regular meeting. That is a application for Marquise Restaurant Group, Windward, doing business as Cha Cha Banga. Secondly, under new business, item number 1, the resolution adopting the partial plan update, the community assessment and the community participation plan in the City of Milton 2008-2028 comprehensive plan. We would ask that we defer that to July the 20th also, sir. And last, we would like to add an executive session to discuss litigation.
Is there any other items to be considered? Okay. Do I have a motion and a second?
I move to approve the meeting agenda as recommended by staff.
Second motion.
We have a motion by Councilmember Tart, second by Councilmember Lusk. Any discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Next item is public comment. Public comment is a time for citizens to share information with the mayor and city council and to provide input and opinions on any matter that is not scheduled for its own public hearing during today's meeting. There's no discussion on items on the consent agenda or the first presentation from the public or from council. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to the city clerk. Please remember this is not a time to engage the mayor or council members in conversation. When your name is called, please step forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. You'll have 5 minutes for remarks. Is there any public comment?
No public comment this evening.
Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda. Will the city clerk please sound the items?
Item number 1, approval of the June 15th, 2009 regular meeting minutes. This is agenda item number 09889.
Do I have a motion and a second?
I move
To approve the consent agenda.
second.
A motion by Councilmember Lusk, a second by Councilmember Tart.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay. Move on to reports and presentations. Will the city clerk please sound the next item?
First, we have a special recognition to Sally Colbert, who is the winner of the logo contest for the 2009 Milton Roundup T-shirt. Miss Linda Blow?
Come.
Okay.
Good evening,
Good evening. Good evening.
Mayor and Council. This year, as you know, the Roundup has been moved to October, and we decided, since there was such a fuss about whose drawing was the best last year among the committee members, that we would open it up to the Milton High School. We had, which we will continue to do from now on. We had 5 entrants, and the one that was chosen is Solly Colbert. And Solly, if you would come forward, please. He's a Milton High School student, and this is his drawing, which you will see on the T-shirts this year. And what we offered to the winner was that their name would be on the T-shirt, and also we would give them some money. I'm sure that being able to display his artistic abilities was first and foremost, and the money was second. But needless to say, it's here, and solely congratulations. We thank you for this. Stay here for a picture.
I'm going to ask the council to step forward and we'll get a picture with Sully.
Yeah, can everybody see this, or do you want him to hold it for the picture? Here, I'll give this to your mom. Yeah, okay.
So, you want to come over here? Yeah, let's go over here, please.
You will each get one.
All right. On three, ready? 1, 2, 3. Say one more. 1, 2.
Good job, Sully. Uh-oh, the newspapers.
Okay, will our city clerk please sound the next item?
Our second item is a proclamation for MDA City of Milton Firefighter Appreciation. Ms. Betsy Grohm?
Okay. All right. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to? I'll go ahead and go first before he reads it. This is my third visit here for a proclamation for our awesome firefighters in the city of Milton for appreciation time, and it is always in the summer. Over the last 2 summers, because they haven't gone out yet this year, they have raised over $64,000 for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. In North Georgia alone, in Atlanta, we have over 2,500 families that we help, and we cover over 43 different diseases, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. With this said, it's everything from helping with the purchase of a power chair to maintaining the power chair, our one-stop clinic visit, where instead of having to drag your child to 5 different doctors on 5 different days, they can see all their doctors in one day. We have clinics currently at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta as well as Emory, and we are doing some of the top research right now down at Emory for ALS. City of Milton happens to be the number 2 department in the state of Georgia when it comes to raising money. Warner Robins is number 1, City of Milton is number 2, and I'm very excited to be working with Chief Edgar this year, who's up from Fort Lauderdale, and MDA is huge in Fort Lauderdale, and they hit the streets pretty much year round for us down there. So it's good to have a new, fresh influence on the guys, and now I will turn it over to the mayor to present the proclamation. I'm going to let you present it to the whole group.
You guys come up here. Dedicated and selfless firefighters in Milton provide vital and life-saving services to the citizens in the community. And whereas at a moment's notice, these men and women risk their lives subduing fires and rescuing those trapped in infernos, as well as saving citizens from emergencies that could have been deadly situations. And whereas Georgia firefighters contribute significantly to the continued well-being of Georgians throughout their outstanding commitment to community service. Their sense of duty and responsibility is evident by their hundreds of volunteer hours in annual boot drive to collect funds to fight muscular dystrophy. And whereas, for over 50 years, firefighters throughout Georgia and the nation have worked with MDA to eradicate the muscular dystrophies, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, and neuromuscular diseases. And whereas, many of Milton's most deserving citizens have benefited from these funds raised by firefighters in the Fill the Boot campaign. And these public servants make invaluable contributions to our community in all tasks they perform. Now, therefore, we, the Mayor and City Council of the City of Milton, do hereby proclaim July through September as MDA Firefighter Appreciation Time in Milton and encourage all citizens in Milton, Georgia to recognize and support the efforts of these firefighters on behalf of MDA. Given under this hand and caused the seal of the City of Milton, Georgia, to be affixed the 6th day of July, 2009. Mayor Joe Lockwood. And I just also want to say how proud and fortunate we are to have firefighters like you guys out there. You make us proud, so thank you.
Real quick, I just want to thank Mayor and Council for this proclamation. And most of the district has been a part of the fire service and a tradition within the fire service for many years. And we're just very proud to be able to continue that tradition. So thank you.
Thank you. Will the city clerk please sound the next item?
Our next item is a proclamation, Americans with Disability Act Day. Councilmember Dioversa.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. We have some wonderful proclamations, wonderful celebrations here this evening, and not the least of which is our celebration of the anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act. Most of you know that about 19 years ago, the act was approved by the federal government that supported persons with disabilities having access in areas that they had not previously had access, and we've come miles and miles since that time in the 19-year span. So we thought it appropriate, given that we have a Milton Disability Awareness Committee that is doing tremendous things in our city, we thought it very appropriate to recognize the ADA anniversary this month on July 26th, as well as to recognize these fine folks that are on our committee. And they were at the parade Saturday, for those of you who were not able to participate in our 4th of July parade, our second annual parade. They were there walking, proudly carrying the banner for the Milton Disability Awareness Committee and for the city of Milton. They represent us so well, and they've done so many things. So with the mayor's permission, I'd like to come down and read this proclamation and have these folks that are representing the committee to join me. It's Marcia O'Shaughnessy, Sharon Lockwood, and Marie Latta, who are here with us tonight. I don't think there are any other committee members who have made it tonight, but we certainly are doing this in their name as well.
For those of you that weren't in the parade, I think I saw Marie and my mom Sharon out there racing in their chairs.
Would you guys like to come up and
They tied, right?
let me read this proclamation to you? Right here. Whereas the City of Milton is a newly incorporated city in Fulton County, Georgia, and promotes inclusion of all citizens at all ability levels in an inclusive community. And whereas the citizens of Milton and the Milton Disabilities Awareness Committee are proud to build upon the Americans with Disabilities Act. And whereas on July 26, 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law, guaranteeing equal opportunity for people with disabilities in public accommodations, commercial facilities, employment, transportation, state and local government services, and telecommunications. And whereas ADA is slowly driving policy changes that have enabled more people with significant mental and physical disabilities to live independently in the community. And whereas 19 years ago, people with disabilities had difficulty participating fully within society, and today they have gained and or retained employment, buildings and shopping centers are now accessible, communication barriers have been resolved, and whereas ADA has begun to change the landscape of our cities and towns, and a civil rights law cannot alone create the kind of transformation and attitudes that Americans with disabilities, their families, and allies are fighting to achieve. And whereas the people of Milton are proud to join together to commemorate this anniversary as we reflect upon the impact that ADA has had upon our country and our community. Now, therefore, we, the mayor and the city council of the city of Milton, hereby proclaim July 26, 2009 as American with Disabilities Act Day in the city of Milton, and do urge all citizens to join in this celebration. Given under the mayor's seal of the city of Milton, his hand and seal of the city of Milton, Georgia, on the 6th day of July, 2009. And this is Ann Coggins, who is the chair of our Milton Disability Awareness Committee, joining us. And these ladies and gentlemen that are on the committee made us very proud during the parade on Saturday. So we're very thankful and appreciative, and we'll make sure that each of you get a copy of the proclamation. But I'll hand it to you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Show
Okay, will the city clerk please sound the next item?
Mr. Mayor, we have a proclamation for Parks and Recreation Month. Councilmember Diaversa.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Mayor. Another fantastic opportunity that I get the privilege and honor of recognizing something that's very near and dear to my heart and to the hearts of all of this council and the mayor. Parks and recreation and open space in our community is something that is at the top of our priority list and our goals for the city and for the community, and I know that our citizens stand with us in that regard. So it is only fitting that this month the National Parks and Rec Association recognizes July as National Parks and Recreation Month. So we wanted to do the same, and I know that tonight I have the president of Hopewell Youth Association that manages our one and only active park, Morgan Dunn, to join us at the podium. I have Mark Shaw, Tom Mulroy, Curtis Mills, and Sandy Shelley from our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board that was newly formed this year. I'd like for you guys to join me, and I'll have the honor of reading this proclamation. And I just want to thank you guys for all your help and support. Morgan, as a volunteer president for the Hopewell Youth Association, managing the baseball programs that we've had in Milton, even before we were a city at Hopewell Youth Association. I know my boys have participated, and we've enjoyed a lot of fun times out there. And this advisory board and their cohorts that join them are working extremely long hours and very hard towards what will become of our Parks and Rec in Milton. So thank you very much for that, for your participation. Whereas, designed to enhance the quality of life in all members of our community, Milton Public Parks are passive areas for quiet contemplation and sports fields for leisure time activities. And whereas parks and recreation activities and leisure experiences provide many opportunities for young people to live, grow, and develop into contributing members of society and create lifelines and continuous life experiences for senior members of the community. And whereas recreation provides safe and enjoyable activities promoting and developing healthy lifestyles, strong minds, and fit bodies, and whereas public parks generate opportunities for people to come together in an inclusive environment and experience a sense of community, attract business and job opportunities while increasing neighborhood housing values. And whereas the City of Milton Parks and Recreation Advisory Board strives to enhance and preserve the quality of life of the diverse community of Milton residents by providing recreational programs and services, both passive and active in nature, with respect for our city's rural heritage and its natural beauty. And whereas the City of Milton strives to include people of all ability levels in parks and recreation programs, and whereas the Milton Bicycle and Pedestrian Path Advisory Committee strives to connect parks and recreation areas through the trail system in and around Milton, and whereas during the month of July we appreciate the vital contributions of the individuals who keep the parks clean and safe for visitors and provide recreational opportunities to improve health and fitness and advocate for more open space and trails. Now, therefore, we, the Mayor and City Council of the City of Milton, hereby proclaim July 2009 as Parks and Recreation Month in the City of Milton and do urge all citizens to join in this celebration, given under the Mayor's hand and seal of the City of Milton, Georgia, on the 6th day of July, 2009. We're going to make sure that each of you guys, Jeanette is actually volunteering for permission to get a copy of this proclamation. And just thank you all very much. I know I speak for the whole council, and if you guys want to come down, we'll get one more picture tonight, maybe. Can't leave these guys out. You're doing something now? We should have had you in the front.
Okay, moving on to our first presentation. Will the city clerk please sound the item?
CM 09-01, VC 09-03, which is 13940, Atlanta National Drive by Alian Tom, represented by Stephen Rothman of Wilson, Brock and Irby, LLC. Rothman for a modification to condition 1E, which is Z85-181, to reduce the 100-foot perimeter setback to 33 feet, and a concurrent variance to reduce the minimum setback from 100 feet to 33 feet for a private court. Article 19.3.8.B.1, agenda item number 09890.
Okay, do I have a motion and a second?
I move to approve the first presentation item.
I have a motion by Councilmember Tartt, second by Councilmember Hewitt.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay, there's no zoning agenda tonight and no items under unfinished business. So let's move on to new business. Will the city clerk please sound the item?
Yes, sir, and we postponed the public hearing by motion and vote. We also deferred item number 1 under new business to July 20th regular meeting. And our next item is approval of a task order for Crabapple Crossroads Transportation Infrastructure Improvements with Kimley Horn for $41,174. Item number 09893. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Thank you. Mayor and City Council, this was a task order that was originally approved by Council back in October of 2008. Partway through the completion of this task order, it was stopped to reevaluate the task order and to incorporate that work within the overall transportation master plan that's being done by Kimley Horn. They're now at the point where this portion of the task order is it's time to incorporate it into that master plan. And so we're bringing this back as completion of that task order in the amount of $41,174 and rolling that in as part of the overall transportation master plan that they're completing. This particular task order is a more defined, more detailed evaluation of the Crabapple area and how that relates to the overall master transportation plan. So you have the overall view of the city that's being done by the transportation plan, and then you'll have this one component that'll be a more detailed look at the whole Crabapple area and how that relates to the rest of the city. With that, I'll answer any questions, and Mrs. DeMassimo, Faye DeMassimo from Kimley Horn is also here if you have any questions for her regarding this task order.
Have any questions from council for Lucas? Julie?
Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Lucas and I talked about this briefly, but just a couple quick questions for confirmation. One, if you can just confirm that it is indeed a budgeted item.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
So it's a budgeted item. Secondly, and I think that Kimley Horn perhaps could just speak to the study area that will be included. It's my understanding that it is more broad than just the Crabapple intersection, which is a positive thing. So if you could just speak very briefly, Faye, to what that study area encompasses.
I actually have a description here of the original study area from the original task order, so I'll read that very briefly, but then talk a little bit more about it. The study area is the Crabapple Crossroads intersection and surrounding areas, including Broadwell Road from Mayfield Road to the south city limits, Mayfield Road from Broadwell Road to Charlotte Drive, Mid-Broadwell Road from Mayfield Road to south city limits, and Birmingham Highway from the Crabapple Crossing Elementary School to Crabapple Road. So it's a larger area. We were really using this to focus in on the cut-through traffic that comes through that intersection that I know all of you all have experienced in the AM and PM peaks, to look at the schools that are in that area and how the school traffic is influencing that area, to begin to look at how old Crabapple and the newer development that's occurring on the other side, how those things can be brought together through streetscape measures, urban design concepts, and those kinds of things. And more particularly, as you know, one of the charges, a bit of an unusual charge under this transportation plan, is to look at a way that the transportation plan could help create a downtown for Milton. And Crabapple Crossroads has consistently been the area that continues to bubble up, both through our meetings, the TSAC committee, through public meetings that we've had, through some of the stakeholder groups, as an area that people recognize and already feel is that sort of heart of the community. And so how we can actually define it in a lot more detail in the overall transportation plan to ensure that that indeed is what it becomes.
Quick question. I heard you mention that it would go as far north as Crabapple Crossing. A suggestion perhaps for Mr. Lucas and for Kimberly Horn is that given that School Drive is just a bit further north, but it really encompasses, I think, some of that traffic and the through traffic between Freemanville and Birmingham Highway, a suggestion would be, if it's within the confines of that 41,000, would be just to ensure that you look at that as well, because you've got Milton High School and Northwestern obviously accessing off of School Drive. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't include that as well. The other question I had was just with regards to the $17,000 that was expended historically. I know that one reason that we had kind of paused with that is that it had started to become more of a site-specific assessment. My question on the $17,000 and the analysis is just whether or not that $17,000 and the value from that will be of positive value in this process.
It will be to a certain extent. In fact, what we're doing, and we're not asking for additional funding to do it, is some of the elements that were covered, the beginnings of the charrette and the initial stakeholder outreach into the old Crabapple area, we're really going to have to re-engage that and not do it over per se. But we've been gone, the last time that they talked to us and heard from us, and the last time that we met with staff on the charrette was back in December. And obviously a bit of time has passed, and we're really going to have to re-engage that community and redo that charrette to really complete it, because it was sort of stopped midway. But we did not ask for any additional funding to do that. We're going to work that into the remaining funding and take the value of what was accomplished before to the extent that we can. One of the other things, too, that I want to mention is later in the evening when we do the overall presentation on where we are with the CTP, one of the things that you'll already see is a lot of this work is already being integrated into the CTP already, and you'll be able to see some of the things that we're doing to try to help capture the ideas that we're starting to try to help capture some of that cut-through traffic that particularly impacts Crabapple Crossroads and bring it through the area in some different ways. So.
Okay. Any other questions? Alan?
I have one question. I think it's on page, maybe it's on page 3 of the contract agreement. Under general scope of service that deals with the work will be completed within 150 calendar days after notice to proceed. And I'm just cognizant of the fact there's two and a half months basically left in the fiscal year. And this isn't necessarily a question for you. It could be staff as far as payment of those funds, because it's paid every 30 days, but yet it'll be assessed on this year's budget.
Yeah, I can address that for you. This was budgeted as a capital expenditure, so those funds can carry over to the next fiscal year.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Bill?
Further to that point on the 150 calendar days, will the completion of this task order and report coincide with the submittal of the comprehensive plan at the end of the year?
It is. The CTP, we're going to complete the CTP, and that's one of the things we're going to talk to you about a little bit later. We've brought the CTP schedule in so that it will complete out December 15th of this year. We've done that for a couple of reasons. In addition to coordination with your comprehensive plan, we're trying to make sure that two things. Milton is positioned in terms of the transportation improvements that will come out of that CTP to try to capture any possible elements of Tiger funds, stimulus funding, any of these kinds of things that are out there right now and coming down the pike. The sooner we can get us out there, the better off we are. That's one thing. The other thing is now the when we first accelerated the schedule, worked with staff to accelerate the schedule about a month and a half ago, the North Fulton CTP at that point had not yet been selected and started moving forward. That's happening now. One of the things that you're going to see later in our presentation is there's some, especially as we're dealing with being mindful of Milton's, what Milton wants to preserve in terms of community character and where that where that enables the transportation improvements to occur more sort of around the periphery, if you will, or around the edges of how we're moving people through and around Milton. We're going to have cooperation and with our neighbors in Alpharetta, Roswell, and others. And you're going to see that the quicker that we can get this CTP into the North Fulton pipeline as well, the more that Milton is going to be able to leverage that study activity also.
So is there any possibility that the contract would be completed earlier than 150 days?
We'll be finished December the 15th, so. Well, I've got a schedule that we're going to pass out a bit later tonight. I'm not sure we can move it any faster than that and give you the kind of quality product that you need. We've already cut about 2.5 months out of the schedule in order to take advantage of those things that I just identified as opportunities that we want to make sure that Milton can leverage to the maximum extent possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Another quick, Karen?
I know initially when the high school was built, the Board of Education showed a road cutting through from School Drive down to where the old Charlotte Road Drive is. Are you going to be looking at that type of transportation? Is that going to go far enough out to you? I know Councilmember Zonner Bailey asked about that. And I know initially when there were some rezonings right there at the end of Old Charlotte, they had even, put some stipulations in for those rezonings for cut through and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make sure that that will still be included in the transportation plan.
We will.
Okay.
I don't remember. Do you remember the extent to which we looked at any of that already, Christine?
I haven't really looked. Most of the additional roadways were really on the southeast side of the intersection.
Okay.
But I know that had been discussed, and we can talk about opportunities for that.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing that precludes that at this point, and getting your comment on that's exactly what we need tonight. Thank you.
Any other questions or? No, do I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion for the approval of a task order for Crabapple Crossroads Transportation Infrastructure Improvements with Kimley Horn for the amount of $41,174.
Second the motion.
I have a motion by Councilmember Hewitt, second by Councilmember Lawson. Is there any discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay, moving on to reports. One thing, this is a little personal, but many of you on staff and citizens know Tim and Ginger Enlow, and unfortunately Ginger Enlow's mother passed away, I believe Friday night, so just to let you guys know she had a battle with cancer. So, do I have any council members with any reports? Julie?
It's not so much a report, Mayor, but I wanted just to bring up this idea in this forum since we hadn't had an opportunity since we were all in Savannah at the Georgia Municipal Association meeting. One of the discussions I had while being a part of GMA, in speaking with Mayor Wood of the city of Roswell, we were talking about the biking activities that they do within the city, and obviously we share our borders. And one of the things that would be the pleasure of this body that we talked about was having Milton included in some of the bike stops, and they've got a bicycle race actually coming up here in about a week. So we may or may not have the opportunity at this particular time, but I know that for the 20-plus years that I've lived in what's now Milton, we have bicyclists that obviously enjoy our rural character, and it seems like a really great opportunity to lever some of the things that are already happening in our adjacent areas. I don't believe it's something that we have proactively pursued. I intend to do that, but only if it be the pleasure of this full body and the mayor. But I think it would be a great opportunity. I know that Mayor Wood is very receptive to that. And I think the bicyclists that already utilize our area would enjoy seeing some more official stops as part of that. So I just wanted to bring that up as a discussion, bring it up since we really hadn't had an opportunity to meet collectively. And if it's something that we're interested in, I'd love to, engage Mr. Lagerbloom or Linda. But I've got an email from Mayor Wood, and just want to make sure that we are proactive in responding, and would love, even if we can't do it this race, that we look to do that. And I think it's timely, obviously, as we acknowledge the importance of parks and recreation and open spaces and connectivity and transportation and alternative approaches. So I just bring that forward for discussion, and if anybody is opposed to that, of course, I'd love to hear that input, or
Is that
conversely.
something our Park and Rec Committee can?
They
work on?
can, but I know that they also aren't meeting anytime soon, and a bike race is something that's really more of an event. And so, of course, the bike and, or kind of the bike and head committee in conjunction with the Parks and Rec Committee, you may have some folks that do that, but I don't think we need to make it any more cumbersome than it need be. It might just be that we need to just connect with the mayor's office of Roswell and perhaps just have a stop, and then we can maybe going forward look to make that more official.
I have a question. Is that, that race is not the one that he's promoted where it goes down from Georgia 400?
Well, I think that actually that race is going to have some folks coming through Milton. We just don't have really an official Milton stop, and that was part of what we wanted to have conversation about. And if there are some races, including that one, where we just need to identify, having a stop in Crabapple or having a stop in Birmingham, where bicyclists are going to be coming through anyway, just an opportunity.
Do you know what the route is?
Well, I think that they do have a route. I think we just don't have any official stops in Milton identified. And so it's having some of that coordination. I think it's an opportunity if we have some coordinated conversation.
Let me allow Linda to, looks like you might have a comment on that.
Yes, Chris was probably going to jump in. Were you?
Well, no, I was going to just ask a question. I was sitting here
Oh.
conferring with Carter as to how exactly you're defining a bicycle stop. There's a couple of different, I guess, definitions of what that is. So
Right,
could
and
you define it better for us so we know what you're thinking?
I think in some parts it's a function of just levering what they're already doing in Roswell, but when those bicyclists come through Roswell, do we necessarily want to just have some citizens out there to encourage them officially as part of that? Conversely, you might have, as an example, if it goes through either Crabapple or Birmingham, you've got an opportunity in that commercial node to have some of those local businesses, offer up water or to do some things. And as I say, the timing may or may not allow us to do something as formal as we might in the future. But I believe that this bicycle race is going to have some folks potentially coming through Milton. And so I think we just proactively need to have some conversation with them. And I'm prepared to do that, and it was, but I didn't want to pursue that without bringing it to the attention of the mayor and council.
Let me just say, is there a consensus on the council to have staff work together with Roswell to put something together for a stop, if that works for the route? Linda, you want to?
If I may interject here, we were asked a few months ago by Kim Hughes from Sandy Springs whether we wanted to put our logo on the bags that they're giving to all the participants, and we did agree to do that. So we've jumped in with our logo, and today actually they called me and asked me to get our one hotel to get 1,000 flyers to the Roswell CVB by Wednesday. So we're partially participating in the fact that our logo's out there.
Right.
And if they're giving away T-shirts, Allie says we're on the T-shirt too, but I
and
think
that's-
you're talking more proactive than
Well-
that. But I just wanted you to know that we aren't entirely out of the picture.
Exactly, but I think it's a
Okay.
great opportunity for us to proactively communicate that we are
Yes.
participating. And I think before now, we really hadn't proactively communicated that. And so I think we have that opportunity now, especially since there's, I think, just acceptance of the desire to participate in any way that makes sense logistically between now and the short term. So thank you, and thank you for making sure.
All of our council members should absolutely ride in the bicycle race. The mayor should as well, not on the motorcycle, but on the bicycle itself.
Only
I
if he
have
has a
bike.
helmet. He's got to have a helmet, though.
I'm sure Jerry Woods has an
You know, I
extra pair of
didn't
bicycles to loan you.
I wasn't clear. Is the ride actually going through a point in Milton?
I think
Is
it
the-
does
is the map-
cross the north side of town.
I mean, do we know where that is on the
I've
north?
seen the map, but I don't remember it off the top of my head.
And again, if it's the council, which I would think it would be, maybe we have staff, or maybe Linda contact them and confirm, or Chris, we'll leave that up to you. Get somebody to confirm where that is, and proactively look at having a stop and all that
I think
entails.
I've just heard from Carter. He's got a contact in Roswell that he can reach out to and learn as to what input we
Right,
could
and I'll
make
I'll
that would
forward
be
you the email
meaningful.
I have, because Mayor Wood's very interested in having us participate, and I'll just send that to you later tonight. And again, I didn't want to pursue that until we had had this discussion.
Well, and I'm not sure if we can get in on this particular race. The stops are going to be generally at defined points, 20, 40, 60
Right.
miles. Whether or not we fall into that, I'm not sure. Coincidentally, I do ride with their Director of Transportation, Steve Asenbrack, every weekend, so we have been talking about trying to do some coordinated bike efforts
Terrific.
between the two cities, because there are a lot of bikers out there that,
Yes,
that
there are.
use the Milton roads. It's a
They
good
are,
route.
and I just think it's a great chance for us to get ahead of the curve, and so thank you.
Thank you for suggesting that, Julie.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, is there any other reports from council?
Mayor?
Karen?
I just want to remind everyone that we do have the town hall meeting for the Crabapple and Arnold Mill Road areas on July 15th. I will be sending out an agenda probably tomorrow. I sent it to Chris today to look at, just covering some items of interest to that area of the city. So it was July 15th at the Alpharetta is allowing us to use their government center, the courtroom building, the courtroom of that government center, so it will be right there in Crabapple. But hopefully all the council and everyone can attend. So Linda will be there promoting the Roundup and the Crabapple Crossroads Antique Fair. So.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more council reports, I'll move on to our city manager.
Mayor, we've got several tonight on purpose, because we're going to try to leverage some of the time we have by a light meeting tonight to address some of the issues that I might have otherwise held off until the end of the month. Before we get into some of those things, I want to remind you that there will be no workshop next week on the 13th. We are going to have a second update on transportation project on the 27th, but I hope that I've whittled it down to the extent that that's all we'll have to do on the 27th. I'm going to try to pick one of the items off that I had advertised. We're going to try to handle that tonight during staff reports, and two of the other items during staff reports of the meeting on the 20th. So we'll try to balance out the workload this month if it's at all possible, so we don't have that marathon of a meeting on the 27th. I do know we have a couple of items to discuss tonight. One is the homeowners tax relief grant that I believe Councilmember D'Aversa wanted to talk about tonight. We're prepared to discuss that, as well as Carter, with the assistance of Kimley Horn and their consultants, to do a comprehensive transportation plan update for you. So we're going to save that one to second, because it takes a little bit longer than the homeowners tax relief grant. I'll let Stacy work her way to the front so she can help explain what that concept is. This is something that we're going to have to make some decisions on, and have to make some decisions on fairly quickly, as to whether or not we want to pass that grant along to our citizens, even if it requires our self-funding it. And Stacy can explain what some of the options we have are, and then if we choose that that's something that we want to pass along to our citizens, we need to have a fairly healthy debate as to where we would take it out of our budget, because, as you recall, we just amended our budget to remove almost $1.5 million from it. This would require removing about an additional $260,000 from that budget itself. So if we choose that we want to fund it and pass it along to our citizens, we just need to then have a discussion as to where we might potentially, and I can't really see any other place that we would have to look at this point, unless anybody else has some grand ideas other than the capital budget. There's just not that much room in the operating budget after the last modifications that we made. So having said that, I'll let Stacy kind of explain what the infamous HTRG is.
Don't quite know what they're bringing up over there, but good evening, your mayor and council. The homeowners tax relief grant, just to give a little bit of background for those who may not know what it is, this is something that was enacted in 1999 by the governor and the General Assembly to provide tax relief for property owners. And credit is automatically given to those property owners who own and live in the home as of January 1 and have filed for homestead exemption with the county before their April 1st deadline. And the way it works is the taxing entities, the cities and counties, have to give the credit on the tax bills to the eligible citizens, and then submit a reimbursement request to the state. Due to the fiscal crisis that the state was in last year, and is still currently in for that matter, the HTRG funding was initially slated to be cut in the fiscal year 2009 budget year, but the General Assembly stood behind it and pushed it through, found funding for it during the spring 2009 session. A resulting amendment to the HTRG bill changed the manner and method of appropriating funds for this credit. And basically, it states that HGRG will be funded if there's money to do so. I've spoken with the HGRG representative at the Department of Revenue, who's indicated to me that it will not be funded in 2009. The impact is to approximately 6,800 Milton residents would be an increase in their tax bills of roughly $250. Of that, $37.85 is attributable to Milton's tax bill, and $215 is attributable to Fulton County's tax bill. If it's the wish of the council to fund this tax credit for citizens, we will need to find approximately $260,000 in the budget. And as you know, this is a pretty slim year. We just had a budget amendment that Chris mentioned, and so really the only place that we can possibly fund this is out of capital projects. There's two options. Do not give it to the citizens, and they'll just have to experience the increase. They're already going to experience an increase of $215 from the county. The county, I've spoken with the county, they're not going to extend it to the citizens because it's just not going to be funded. The county can't afford it. And I've spoken with other cities around us. Nobody is giving the credit to their citizens. So that's number one option. Do not give it to the citizens. That's $37.85 on 6,800 residents' tax bills, or to give it and fund it.
Okay, so basically what we're talking about is approximately $37 per household, or 6,800 of our citizens, which they'll, even if we were to do something, they'd still experience the 215 or so from the county, correct?
Correct.
So the decision is, obviously, as staff has said, it's not a budgeted item, so we would have to come up with it somewhere. And the negative to the citizens, if we don't, is a $37 bill. So, any questions for Stacy?
I just have a comment, and thank you very much for that thorough review. One of the reasons why I'd asked Stacy about the grant and the funding of it, and the fact that Fulton County was not going to fund it, is to make sure that citizens are aware of it, because the last thing we want is to receive these tax bills. And we've had similar situations happen, not necessarily as the city of Milton, but with Fulton County and with other government agencies where taxing was an issue, and where it in effect amounts to an increase in taxes because they're not getting this particular reduction. So our credit, I should say. So one of the things that I'd just like to see us do is make sure that we communicate appropriately. And I understand if it's the will of this council to not fund it if we can't fund it. And I appreciate that you've tried, in every way to find money to be able to fund it. I know it doesn't amount to a whole lot per person, but at this juncture, pennies are seeming to really hurt families these days. So my hope was that somehow we'd find something under, a rock somewhere, and I'm being facetious, but I really mean that, in that, even $37 or, $25 a year to some families is going to be challenging, even in Milton. So that was my reasoning, and I just hope that we'll communicate pretty openly as to why we can't fund it, and encourage, if they have questions, to communicate with Fulton County as well.
And that may be something, as Stacy explained it, maybe get together with Chris, and maybe it's something you could put on our website to, a brief explanation and somewhere where people could get information on that and realize.
There, and I'll let you know that I saw in the Review and News, the Alpharetta version last week, that they did a real nice story when Alpharetta, they obviously were forced with a similar decision, and they elected not to pass along that funding to their citizens. But it was a very nice article that was written in their local paper that explained that, in fact, it wasn't Alpharetta that was doing that. It was happening at a much larger level. So I turned around to see if Jason was still in the audience, but I didn't spot him.
He's watching us on TV.
Yeah, maybe he's watching us at home.
I did give him my notes.
But we'll see if that's the decision that the council makes, and I'm not certainly advocating that that's the decision that you make, but if you do, we'll obviously work with Jason as well to help us. They've already helped one city get the word out. Certainly they would do the same for us.
It's just a decision that we need to take action on, or is it a decision if we leave it alone, then basically it means we don't fund the
Right.
$37?
I don't necessarily need a vote from you tonight. If there's an overwhelming feel of the council that we should fund it, then the marching orders that Stacy and I would take away is to figure out exactly where we would recommend you fund it from and bring something back to you on the 20th with a recommendation. If you don't feel that that's the route we want to go at this point in this climate, then we won't take any action away from it unless you bring it back up again.
I'm going to go ahead and just ask for maybe a show of hands of, is there interest in having the city try to fund this amount?
My opinion, just since I was talking earlier and had asked the question, would be that we, and again, I don't mean any negative towards you guys. I know you have gone through this budget with a fine-tooth comb, and I do appreciate it, but I'm mindful of some of the things that you guys found that were things that we weren't aware of that were in that budget that were able to be reappropriated or cut out of the budget in order to find the $1.5 million. And I know that it's asking a lot, but if you'll just make sure one last time that you've looked through it again, I mean, the last thing I want to do is to not be able to give a credit to citizens that have relied on it, even if it is a small credit.
I guess.
I have a couple of questions, because one of them is rather a point of order, and I guess I don't feel comfortable voting one way or the other, since it's not even, this is almost a tax issue, and I just don't feel very comfortable voting up or down on something when we haven't even announced it, that we're going to be talking about it, or citizens haven't even been given an opportunity to give their view on the issue. If you're okay with doing that, then.
No, I agree with you. The way I took it was more of an informal show of hands to see about further action on it, but I agree with you. Nothing formal needs to be done on this.
Definitely not voting on it or whatever. We're just trying to see a show of hands. Is there interest in moving forward with it, or we're leaving it as is?
And then I had a second question. Do we have any, do we know how many homes in Milton were reassessed, the property values are reassessed? Because mine was reassessed, and fortunately and unfortunately, the value of it went down, which is interesting since it came from Fulton County. But nevertheless, I will probably see a decrease in my taxes this year. So this is going to be offset, I'm sure. And I just wonder how many people got that.
I've asked that question, and they're not able to give me the answer. They haven't given me any 2009 numbers yet, and I just can't get any information out of Fulton County right now on that issue.
We've been on the 2-week. I'll just tell you, we've been on the 2-week plan for about 2 months now. that data is coming in 2 weeks, and that data has been coming in 2 weeks for about 2 months. So as soon as we can. As soon as we can get you that data, it's not that we haven't tried to get it. We keep waiting on the digest, and that's been 2 weeks out for about 2 months as well. So, so many of them are in appeals, and they're just trying to get down below that 3%.
Okay. Bill?
Thank you, Mayor.
Bill, go ahead.
Just let me be clear on one point. Are we talking about $37 per homestead or $260 per homestead?
$37 per homestead.
215. We don't have any control.
For the city, but they're going to have to pay two.
The difference between
we don't
that
have any control.
correct. Correct.
So the county's still going
The
to
county is
back off.
still, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously it's an important point. And this information is so helpful because I think a lot of it's going to be a function of communication, that it's really $38 per household. And I agree that even if we can find that additional $260,000, I think we should, because we should always be scrubbing that budget as much as we can. So I would concur that as you guys continue to evaluate that, if there's some found dollars, we need to identify those and then provide those dollars back to our citizens. I contrast the $37 per household, however, with that only being $68, and I think about $260,000 in our capital budget, which would mean we couldn't do things in our Parks and Recreation area. And knowing how important Parks and Recs are, my concern would be from a capital budget perspective, unless we find some dollars, for things that we haven't yet identified, I'd be concerned about cutting that budget by almost $300,000 because of the impact to some of these programs and things that, of course, we also hear from citizens. And I think that if we communicate the balancing act that we're going through, I think folks will understand that. And I think the most important being, as Councilmember Lush just pointed out again, Fulton County is the lion's share of that increase to the taxpayer. So I think that if we communicate effectively with details, and if we can get that additional data about the number, of those 6,800 residents, how many of those experienced a reduction, because effectively they may still be then seeing a reduction in their tax bill, which of course would be our hope.
Yeah, I would try to contact the county again to ask them if they can give me some information about the reassessments in the area.
And it may be that we don't want to wait 2 weeks to communicate. I mean, hopefully, we would put together communication sooner, not later.
Well, I would say to that point, we did discuss earlier communicating, and it's a good point. That's why I totally agree. $37 to Councilmember Diaversa's point is $37, but it's also $260,000 to the city, and I would be willing to bet that most citizens would forego $37 if it went towards, something Parks and Recreation or future things for the city. I think Bert had a comment, and then Karen, and then we'll.
I was just going to say real quick that agreeing with Tina, but I'd imagine that y'all know the budget backwards and forwards, and can probably answer that question without having to look at it again. But I appreciate that, and then kind of what Joe was saying is the citizens will probably get a better value out of their $37 added to their tax bill than cutting something out of a larger picture.
Karen?
I know from having gone over everything with you, y'all have looked at the budget, and it's as tight as it could possibly be right now. And without knowing what the numbers from Fulton County will come in at, and even more so what our collections will be on those numbers, I think that we don't really have a whole lot of choice right now until we have a better understanding of those revenue numbers without really cutting services to our citizens. So, as hard as it's going to be for a lot of people to swallow, this was something that was really done not by us, but by the state, because they're the one that has been financing this, and they're the one that's pulling it away from not only us, but the counties and everything else. That I'm not sure that you can look as much as you want, but like I said, you can't get blood from a turnip, and I'm afraid that we may be as thin as we can be.
Why don't I commit this? I don't know if this would wrap this one up for tonight. Why don't I commit that? There's absolutely no harm in us going through a budget again. I mean, that's what we do every day. There's no harm in doing that. I'm happy to do that. In speaking with our city attorney, it probably would be a good idea that we do put this on a future agenda just so we can get some type of action on it. And to Councilmember Tartt's point, this was more of just a discussion on the topic tonight than it was actually looking for action. Jeanette, why don't we place that on the first meeting in August?
Sure.
For some.
And I just, want to clarify, it sounds like, everybody on the council is concerned about the citizens and taxes and whether it's $1, pennies, or $37, but obviously, it is a big budget item that we probably don't have. So I think that's the right direction. That'll give staff a chance to possibly look over again if there is something, which we're not hopeful that there is. We don't think that there is, but then we can formally put it on an agenda and either take action on it or just leave it as it lies. So if I think, Bill, you may want to say something, and we'll wrap this up.
Just briefly, don't the tax bills go out the 1st of September?
That is when our ordinance says they should go out.
Right.
According to the charter, it says that we should go. They should be billed whenever Fulton County bills their tax bills.
Right.
So it doesn't look like Fulton County will be billing anytime soon because to my knowledge, they still haven't submitted the 2008 digest for certification by the state.
My point is, we have to have this resolved before the tax bills go out. Is that
right? And it does take some time to do the tax bills, and so there is no hurry to rush to a decision right now.
Okay,
we
so
do have some time.
what you're saying is that your time is fine on that. Okay, all right, thank you. We'll move on to the next.
Yeah, Mayor, our second more lengthy staff report tonight is an update for you all on the comprehensive transportation plan. And I'll get out of the way so the buttons will work and turn it over to Carter.
And, I'm going to go back to Ken on this point of order. Since we've added that, is this, if it's not on the agenda, or what's your thoughts on it?
It's one of the things that you would expect to see on an agenda as well. It would not have been the least bit out of order to have been on a formal agenda as just a report. It's just a formal PowerPoint report, so I think it's fine. Okay. But again, to Councilmember Tartt's point, we have to be a little careful about taking action on that.
Okay.
And this one tonight, we're not asking for any action.
This
is an update for the council.
It's going to be all in public records and.
Yeah, and frankly, the way we looked at it tonight when Carter and I discussed it, because we had that discussion, this would be something that he might just be sitting here in front of the mic and updating the council on during the staff report, and this one just happens to have a neat PowerPoint that goes with it, but that's really what it was designed as. Not looking for any action, more just information sharing.
So you're okay with that, Ken?
Mr. Mayor, I am.
Perfect.
Mayor and Council, Faye DeMassimo is here with Kimley Horn to give us an update on our current status on the City of Milton Transportation Plan.
What I'm going to do is we're going to give you an overview of where we are first, and then Christina Pastor is really going to get into some of the technical aspects of what we've been evaluating and working on in terms of the needs assessment, some of the preliminary recommendations that are starting to come out, but wanted to give you an update on where we are right now.
Last time I was here and spoke to you, we had just begun the needs assessment. We're probably at this point about 99% through the needs assessment. It will be delivered to the city at the end of this month. We had a great work session with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee that you appointed about 3 weeks ago. They are very energized, and we had, like I said, a very exciting meeting and got a lot of good recommendations on the table. Where we are and what you're going to see tonight is just the beginnings of that, though. We've really started to identify the needs. What we've started to form is some of the bigger kinds of things that could come out of this in terms of recommendations for individual intersection projects, safety projects, bike ped improvements, and all those kinds of things. We're not going to be talking about those in detail because that's still coming, and you'll see where these things are going to be occurring on the schedule. The information that you were just presented is just a status update of all of the activities that have taken place since I last was here to meet with you. You'll see this also includes the access management task, as well as the pavement management task, and that's the one that I know the city manager referenced earlier that we'll be back to meet with you on the 27th. And then the important dates. Again, as we discussed earlier when we were talking about the Crabapple Crossroads project, we have accelerated the Milton CTP schedule for a couple of reasons, which we talked about earlier. And you can see here the kinds of things that are going to be occurring through the rest of the project. We will be presenting the council on December 14th with the final report in the council work session, and anticipate your being able to adopt it on the 21st. So we will be bringing it in. I think, Mr. Lush, you asked me that earlier, by the end of the year. The last time I was here to talk to you, we were essentially about right here, I think. So we're still right on target, especially with this new accelerated schedule with end of June, beginning of July. And this red block right here is the deliverable at the end of this month of that needs assessment that we just spoke about. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina, and she's going to take you through the scenario concepts. We're going to be talking about, we're going to try to make sure that we don't talk to you in transportation lingo. So if we use some term and you go, what on earth is that, please go ahead and wave at us, because we want to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. We also did for the CPAC committee, the TSAC committee, and staff, we gave a little travel demand modeling 101 paper. That is available to you guys as well if you like it. We didn't want to bore you with the details of that this evening, but if that's something you really want to dig into, I know we had a very short session with CPAC one evening where we were there to coordinate. They had other things on their agenda, and we didn't have as much time to dig into it with them, so we provided an update white paper after that. And then our next TSAC meeting, we made sure we really got into it, because travel demand models are the tools that we use, but they're interesting in terms of what they can do, what they can't do, and what they actually represent. We want to make sure that everybody understood that. So with that, I'm going to be holding these up as Christina's talking through them.
Good evening. As Faye mentioned, my name is Christina Pastor, and I am the one who's been doing most of the modeling work. Just to give you a little bit of idea of what we're doing, this very first map that Faye is holding, we decided not to bring all of the different time periods. It would be information overload, so we've brought with us all of the PM analysis, just to give you an idea. The very first map that you're looking at, this is one of the result maps from the model. And this model map is what we call our 2010 existing plus committed. And what that is basically the model year 2010 population and employment, which is very close to where we are right now. And the existing plus committed means all of the transportation infrastructure that's currently out there today, plus anything that is in the transportation improvement program that basically has funding attached to it. So you'll notice, well, you probably can't notice, but West Side Parkway is completed in this. So there are some things that aren't out there today that are in this model. But this is basically where we start out at looking at where are the transportation issues more or less today. And the color scheme that you can see on the side might be a little bit difficult to see. We've done it in a rainbow. Level of service indicates, it's an A through F, kind of like when you're in school. Level of service determines how well you're moving. Level of service A means it's free flow. If you're driving on the interstate, you can move as fast as you want in any direction. Level of service F is more or less a parking lot. So we try to avoid level of service E and F at all costs. D tends to be what we consider to be a somewhat acceptable level of service. So any of the areas that you see that are red are currently areas where the model understands that we're experiencing problems. The next map that Faye is holding is the 2030 existing plus committed. No, that's right. What we did here is we kept the same exact infrastructure. We didn't assume any other transportation enhancements were completed in the next 20 years. But we took the 2030 population employment. So we basically took 20 years of growth of people moving to Milton according to what ARC has currently anticipated, and put that additional growth on the existing infrastructure. So as you can see, there's a lot more red because we haven't really done anything to accommodate that new growth. It's just coming and we haven't done anything. This is the basis for our needs assessment. And so we're able to look in, if you notice since this is a PM map, we've noticed a lot of the travel patterns are coming away from 400 and back over into Milton, into Cherokee, into Forsyth. So you'll notice that one direction particularly is red. So this is the basis for where we started. Now, we did 5 different scenarios as an initial place to start and looked at, and these are not recommendations, these are strictly just different concepts for looking at how land use and transportation interact. And we brought these 5 concepts to the TSAC meeting, and so we're going to walk very briefly through these first 5. These, like I said, are very preliminary, and we presented them to TSAC for their opinions.
We've also brought this information to CPAC as well, so we've been coordinating with them on this as well.
Yes. Okay. If you look on the PowerPoint slide, the very first concept that we considered was the basic ARC growth. So ARC looks at the way that you're developing now and predicts based on everyone coming to the region, how many more people are going to be coming to Milton and where are they going to be locating within Milton. So our very first scenario assumes that people locate wherever they are anticipated to locate by ARC. And we took and looked for transportation enhancements based on the 2030 existing plus committed and looked at ideas for how we could possibly alleviate some of that. So this very first one looks at widening 2 major corridors, 2 major east-west corridors throughout the city. The first one is Birmingham Road over to Hamby and across over to the McFarland Interchange. The second one actually adds a new connection from New Providence over to Arnold Mill, and you can see it basically would go similar to the area where the landfill is, and then takes and widens the rest of that all the way across Bethany, Providence to Bethany, and over to a new interchange at McGinnis Ferry. So this was the very first concept. And like I said, the land use, we just assumed it was going where it was going. The second scenario, we actually took the land use and said, and this is actually very consistent with what CPAC has done, we took that same overall growth for Milton, but instead of letting it just occur wherever, we took 75% of the growth and concentrated it south of Bethany and Providence. So you can see just in the very southern part of Milton. And then left only 25% in the northern part. So that was to try to keep the northern part more rural in nature and concentrate the development where some of it seems to be occurring a little bit more. The transportation enhancements that we did for this included that same east-west connector over to the new McGinnis Ferry interchange, as well as widened Arnold Mill down to Rucker over to where Old Milton widens out. The third scenario uses that same southern-oriented development with 75% on the south side, but instead of having two connectors, we actually looked at one major connector and really kind of, instead of just widening it to 4 lanes, we also made it maybe a boulevard concept where you wouldn't have, you'd have a median coming through and turn lanes. So it would be maybe a little bit faster moving road and try to concentrate the growth all along there. The fourth concept takes that same transportation scenario but mixes it with the land use scenario of the growth occurring where it is. So you can see we're taking land use scenarios and transportation scenarios and pairing them to see what the different results are. The fifth one is actually a bit unique. We looked at, we know Milton would like to maintain its rural character, and so we said, what if Milton decided to close off its boundaries and not allow any other people to move in? Well, obviously those people don't disappear, so we had to put them in adjacent areas around in Alpharetta and Roswell and some of the neighboring counties. So by keeping all of the transportation on the outskirts, then what additional transportation requirements would we have? And you can see we have taking from Batesville across Providence over to Bethany, across Birmingham over to Hamby like we had talked about before, and then also widening Cogburn all the way down to Windward. So this was kind of our reduced transportation and land use scenario.
And the real purpose, I think, of scenario 5, and it's to do it, I think, in a really vivid way, but to still do it nonetheless, is to be able to say that truly, if we didn't grow anymore, would that take care of our problems? And what we see is that if we pushed all the growth somewhere else, we've still got transportation issues to deal with because we're still getting people coming through Milton. So it's just to try to make sure that we're understanding that relationship between what all's going on around us and what we're trying to plan for here.
So these are the 5 scenarios that we took to the TSAC committee, and really on June 18th we sat down and took a pen to paper and really started talking about the different scenarios and other ideas that the Milton TSAC members had. And so that's how we came up with scenarios 6 and 7, which we have next, and we actually have the results of those maps here with us. Both scenarios 6 and 7 have the land use scenario where 75% is concentrated on the south side and 25% is on the north. And that's the TSAC was in agreement that that was an acceptable plan, and that's also the plan that CPAC is moving forward with. So we feel comfortable with selecting that as the land use scenario. But we have 2 transportation scenarios that correspond. Scenario 6, and you'll notice there's these transportation improvements are very much oriented on the outskirts or even outside of Milton. The first one is along Arnold Mill across to Rucker Road to where Old Milton widens out. And you've seen this is one that we tested before. Additionally, we have coming down from Hopewell across Hamby and over to McFarland. Instead of cutting across Birmingham, we're taking some of the traffic that's coming from the north and taking them along the outskirts of Milton. And then we also widened State Route 9 all the way from where it ties into McFarland all the way down to Windward. Scenario 7, notice the other thing on here, we did not make the new connection over from Arnold Mill to New Providence. And we also did not have the new interchange. So this is our low-scale transportation option. The second version, scenario 7, is all of those same improvements with a couple additional adjustments. We've taken State Route 9 and actually widened it to 4 lanes all the way down to Mayfield. So it's a little bit further than we had taken the other one. We've made the new connection from Arnold Mill over to New Providence. It's only a 2-lane connection, but it's still that connection. We're adding more connectivity. And then we've also widened Bethany Bend over to McGinnis Ferry and added that new interchange. So it's a slightly more robust transportation option. So
A couple of things we specifically talked with CPAC about as well on scenario 6 and 7 is the McGinnis Ferry interchange. What was their thoughts on that in or out? CPAC's thoughts, even before we took it to TSAC, but we got the same response from both, was there's an assumption that that interchange is likely to occur at some point, and especially given this notion of bringing the traffic around the outskirts of Milton to preserve most of Milton in its rural character, gives
have the Scenario 6 and Scenario 7 model results. And you'll notice there still is a great deal of red. Unfortunately, we also don't have any other types of improvements in here that would be in the 2030 ARC and Vision 6 model. These are just strictly local improvements in Milton. So obviously we're not going to see a humongous change. But there are some changes, and some of them that you may not be able to see. There's obviously more traffic on the roads that we widen. So Arnold Mill is seeing more traffic. State Route 9 is seeing more traffic. Hopewell to Hamby is seeing more traffic. However, a lot of those roads are also improving in level of service because they're not gaining as much traffic as can't be accommodated by the roadway. Most of the improvements are in the off-peak direction, so the people that are traveling opposite traffic. Some of them actually, even though they're still red, they might not look like they improve, but there is a reduction in volume that we're seeing in the model. And some of those roads where there is an improvement in both 6 and 7, there's an improvement along Arnold Mill in terms of the level of service gets better on Arnold Mill, Hopewell, Hamby, Thompson, Batesville, and State Route 9. The level of service in 7 actually goes down on some of your roads along Providence just because we've made that new connection, so it's a little bit more attractive for people to now come across that way. But in terms of the roads that actually lose traffic, if you will, let me make sure I have these right. Roads like Batesville, Highway 372, Hopewell, and Cogburn, a lot of those roads are actually seeing less traffic because with the widened facilities in other areas outside of Milton, it's attracting traffic outside. So they're not major changes, but there are some changes that we're seeing with people being able to move out to other roads, probably taking some of those commuters who are normally coming through Milton and diverting them outward. But because we're not taking anything right through Milton, we're not seeing substantial changes on some of those roads.
A couple of things that are important to remember on all of these, but particularly with scenario 6 and 7, is 6 and 7 are starting to become the framework for what the recommendations will be, but this is by no means all of what you're going to see in the final recommendations. This is just try to provide that sort of larger infrastructure with what are we trying to accomplish, bigger picture. And as I mentioned earlier, there's still going to be a lot of safety improvements, intersection improvements, bike pit improvements, those kinds of things that you're going to see when we get to the final plan. The other thing too that we pointed out earlier, and you can see how critically important it's going to be, is because we are looking at the kinds of major transportation improvements, if we want to call them that we're suggesting under 6 and 7. They're down in this area, they're over in this area. Obviously, these kinds of things we're not going to accomplish without Alpharetta working with us. We're not going to accomplish this without our neighbors working with us. So the North Fulton CTP really starts to become very key for ensuring that the Milton Transportation Plan, once it is complete and you've adopted it, if this is a framework that you find desirable, that's going to be a key to making it happen.
Just a follow-up comment on phase. This model does not take into account any intersections. So, for instance, Crabapple, the intersection at Crabapple and Birmingham, does not look nearly as bad in this model because it doesn't see intersections that aren't operating well. So this is just purely based on things like volume. So as Faye said, we're going to be tackling other problem intersections that have have high incidence or other just operational issues. We're going to be doing that as part of that. And the other thing I wanted to mention is some of the roads don't really change in volume. Mayfield along the Crabapple area doesn't really change in volume. But there's something to be said for that because we've actually changed the land use scenarios. We've concentrated more development on the south side. And so for roads like Mayfield not to increase in traffic, despite the fact that we've put more density there, also means that some of those other roadway improvements are pulling traffic that would otherwise be trying to go along roads like Mayfield and Crabapple are actually going elsewhere.
And that 75-25 split that we've talked about of whatever that development picture, population growth picture is, 75% of it occurring in the southern end, 25% through the rest of Milton. That is something that CPAC told us that was a number that they felt comfortable with. That was their view as well, and TSAP felt comfortable with it as well. So that's really become sort of the underlying foundation for where we're going. In terms of some questions that I know some of you
I'll use State Route 9 as an example. If there is a plan with the state, with the DOT currently to widen State Route 9, how does that play into your modeling? Do you look at that and say, okay, look, there's a plan already, so we're going to incorporate this in our plan and move from that point forward? Or do you say, that doesn't make, just hypothetically, that doesn't make sense to widen that road, so we're going to look to try to change that plan that the state has to widen it?
It kind of depends on where it is in the process. What we talked about earlier about E plus C being existing plus committed, what we do in the planning process is we look at those projects that we said are out there open to traffic right now, and those that are our assumption of our baseline is those projects plus whatever is actually programmed with dollars in the Atlanta Regional Commission's Transportation Improvement Program, TIP. Anything beyond that, anything that might be in the plan, we can test all kinds of things, and we do, but it's not built into the assumption of this thing is done, and so.
Given the fact that the Taubman development is in progress between McFarland and McGinnis Ferry on the east side of 400, and there's another mixed-use development that's proposed on the north end of that, I would think there'd be some overwhelming pressure to make that interchange at McGinnis Ferry and 400 a reality. What kind of interchange, interaction, correspondence have you had with Forsyth County, number one, and what do you see as what's the probability of that interchange happening, which of course is going to dictate one of these or two of these scenarios?
Actually, we coordinated with Georgia DOT because an interchange being placed there has to be approved through an IJR, an interchange justification report, or an interchange modification report document. Because of it being on the interstate, that's what the Georgia 400 is treated just like the interstate under its stewardship agreement between Federal Highway and Georgia DOT. So we coordinated with them to find out exactly where that was now in the process. There is a document, a traffic engineering analysis document that has been reintroduced. Georgia DOT a few years ago turned down an IJR or IMR at that location, and a few years ago was probably, I think, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. They are reevaluating that currently, and it's not through the approval process yet. I don't know exactly where it is over there, but I do know that it's been reintroduced and is being reconsidered. And I think that I would anticipate, similar to what we heard in terms of the viewpoints of your CPAC members and TSAC members, that an interchange there is likely at some point.
So that would necessarily dictate probably what scenario 6 and 7?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we could still take that little piece of any of the scenarios and plug it in. There could become a scenario 8 that still includes McGinnis Ferry, but also includes some other different things based on your input. And we still have, we are going to be a part of the Milton Roundup. That's going to be one of our next public events, as we'll be participating in that to get public input there. And that public opinion survey is going to be accomplished right about that same period of time. So we've still got a lot of public input to come into this to help shape what the final scenario is. I have no doubt that there will be a scenario 8 or so before we're all done.
You will be at the town hall meeting in Crabapple on the 15th, correct? I believe you had said you would.
Yes.
And I didn't know if you wanted to use that meeting to gain any kind of insight from people there, because I know transportation will be something that everyone is very concerned about, especially in the Crossroads area.
Certainly, absolutely. I mean, we can gain input and everything that night at that meeting. And I think James is going to be at that meeting, if I remember.
I believe he said, he sent me an email, said he would be there.
That's
so
correct.
I just want to make sure that we had you on the agenda, and if you could have him maybe get with me to let me know how much time or whatever he will need. But we're hoping for a good turnout at the meeting, and I'm sure people would love to give you their opinion on the intersection.
Yeah, and with Crabapple in particular, we're going to be like I said, as we talked about earlier under that work order, we've got to begin the charrette again in that community, sort of pick that back up. We've got to go out there and re-engage with the folks in Old Crabapple in particular, because we had a lot of interaction with them back in December and very definite opinions about the community.
And I believe they are actually having an emergency meeting prior to our meeting, so I'm assuming there will be a lot of them.
I'll get the
there.
details with you after this meeting so that I make sure.
And also, I wanted to make a comment. The cut through from New Providence to Arnold Mill is something that's been on Fulton County's transportation maps for, I know, at least 25, 30 years. And obviously was never done because the funds were never there. So my greatest concern is now, I mean, what it would have cost 25 years ago is pennies compared to what it would cost for us to do something like that, because there are homes in that area currently. How do you go about making sure, I mean, a transportation plan on paper can look great, but is it realistic, and is it something the city would ever be able to afford or be able to do? How is that addressed as part of the plan?
I'll let Christina talk a little bit about that one in particular, but generally speaking, any of these concepts that we're talking about here tonight, we're very much at the conceptual stage of those, and we're going to be truthing those through the whole process, both in terms of looking at the cost estimates of them, in terms of looking at whether there is some sort of a constraint there that we didn't note for some reason that would be a barrier to implementation. We've already started trying to note those kinds of things, but there could be enough public opposition to a project for whatever reason.
I mean, because realistically, maybe once the landfill is filled in and the time has passed with which it can actually be used again, that might be a time that a road could go through that area. But in the meantime, I mean, I just want to make sure we don't go down a path of drawing something that looks wonderful on paper, but it's not realistic.
We haven't looked a great deal at that. I know I think we made a joke when we were working with Alice that landfill's always a good neighbor to put a road next to, because it's not going to really complain too much. So I mean, depending on where that road could actually fit in, maybe it can run close to the landfill, closer than any homes would ever be located. So a roadway is not going to be nearly of concern as putting a residential use adjacent to a landfill. So we may have some flexibility there, but we've already started looking at. We looked a lot at the east-west connectivity along Providence to Bethany, and just the offset intersection at Bethany and Hopewell, I believe, and just all of the difficulty that causes, because there's so many people using that as a through route. So started looking at what are the opportunities for relocating that, or even maybe changing the through movement. Instead of, if everybody's making a right turn, maybe we make that the through movement. So looking at what those impacts to properties would be. Obviously, we're not looking to take out houses. So however we have to modify the transportation improvements to keep that into consideration. We're doing that right now.
Julie?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In terms of that particular point with the landfill, I just wonder, Waste Management, obviously, I think part of their process also is to give back to the community from a funding perspective. And I just wonder, and I know we've had some projections in terms of when that landfill would be at its capacity, but it would be interesting whether or not Waste Management as a corporate partner would be interested in starting to put some funding aside, since they are located on Arnold Mill, whether that's for a connection or whether that's for a road next to that, but obviously they use that road, and a lot of the trucks that come and go from that landfill are there, and that's obviously putting a lot of wear and tear on the roads that we're, as a city, then paying for. But maybe we can get ahead of that curve with Waste Management and talk to them about what they might be willing to do. They presented us with some checks in the past, but maybe those checks could start to go specifically towards transportation funding as one option, and then because they're going to have to look for a use of that land eventually, all the better for that planning to start happening now. One other quick question as it relates to the scenarios, whether that be 1 or 6 or 7. I think I heard you say that some of the intersection-specific improvements or right turns or roundabouts, et cetera, have not yet been contemplated. As part of that, let's just say options 6 and 7, as those continue to get refined, will we start to see how some of those red areas further improve through intersection improvements? So I view that kind of taking that big picture of 6, 7, or maybe an 8, but then saying, okay, now in addition to that, what would we be looking at in terms of intersection improvements? Oftentimes just a right turn lane or a roundabout, how that will further benefit the level of service without perhaps expanding some of those roads. Are we going to see that level of detail as we go from a option 6, 7 to a refined 6 and 7?
The model itself does not work with intersections.
Okay.
And we actually really don't want it to. This is a 20 county model. So to get down to the intersection detail, it gets very confused. And so you won't see any improvements on the maps per se.
Right.
But in terms of, the maps might not even be reflecting what you experience as you're driving through those intersections today. So in that respect, it's not really a good comparison. But we will be looking at specific intersections. Some of the intersections that have high incidence, we've looked at some of them that they're angled literally like this, and the sight distance issues from them are very, it's impossible to see trying to make turns at two-way stop intersections. So we will be making recommendations for intersection operations as, we don't have counts at every intersection.
Right.
And so, but some of the traffic studies have already talked about some of the ones that have, especially on the south side, there are quite a few traffic studies, intersection counts that have been done. Crabapple, we've already started to look at that intersection and some of the options for improving the operations at that intersection. I mean, we witnessed it one morning standing out there with the staff. And I mean, different things like turn lanes or even maybe a roundabout depending on the redevelopment potential of that intersection. We're looking specifically at that one, but we'll also be looking maybe at a little bit higher level at some of the other intersections.
But we'll be using other tools, Julie, to measure the improvement
Right.
beyond just the travel man model.
Right.
Once you get past this part of the scenario work, you have to start using different tools, some of which is off-model techniques, some of which is good professional judgment, engineering expertise, traffic engineering, or traffic models versus travel
Right.
man models, those kinds of things. And at the end, when you get done with the transportation plan, it really represents a picture of improvements that's measured in some different kinds of ways, but overall, we will be able to tell the story, if you will, of how much improvement, what you're going to gain by the investment that's suggested through the transportation.
Right, and that's kind of what I think I'm hearing. I just wanted to confirm that because I think to your point, 6 and 7 might have some of those broad improvements in the peripheral areas and maybe in those southern regions, but then we're going to see some additional levels of service improvement through some of these additional tools and mechanisms that you'll be still recommending. So in other words, when folks, whether it's at upcoming meetings or in the next month or so, that level of service improvement is not all the level of service they're going to see. As an example, Birmingham and Providence is already an intersection that has funding assigned to it. And my sense is that these models and scenarios 6 and 7 as an example don't yet contemplate the improvement or level of the service improvement that we're going to see from that funding that's already set aside. Is that fair? Okay. That helps a lot.
No. And then Alan?
Keep going back to McGinnis Ferry. Because, there are contracts out there now to widen McGinnis Ferry through the other side of Fulton County and into Gwinnett County. I foresee that as the next cross-county connector. Aside from Forsyth County, which has influence on sections of McGinnis Ferry, what future plans do you see to widen the rest of McGinnis Ferry from Milton city limits here over to the section that's being widened now over at East Fulton County and Gwinnett County?
One of the things that will be accomplished under the North Fulton CTP is, I know that you all know who's participating in that, the 5 communities that are North Fulton, but one of the stakeholder groups that's going to be engaged under that process is all the surrounding areas. It'll be a little different than what you typically have on a CTP, where normally your stakeholder groups are people that are either internal to you or external, like an entity that can affect you, like a GDOT or a Greta or somebody like that. On the North Fulton CTP, one of the things that's going to be accomplished is a group, or a stakeholder group that engages all those surrounding communities to take up those very kinds of issues and say, let's all put our plans on the table and figure out beyond just who's just right around us, but a bigger picture of who's around us. How is that going to influence exactly those kinds of investments, and how do we need to work together, or where are the issues where we can't work together to be able to get those things accomplished. So I think that that's the right place for that to occur. And it is going to occur. It's actually stated in there.
And along those same lines, because my question was your answer answered, I think, half my question, because you had mentioned that the travel memo only takes into account traffic improvements that are currently funded, and so it doesn't take into account the transportation plans of adjacent municipalities.
It can.
It can.
You can, but what I'm saying is in terms of that, what's the baseline that you're measuring from? The baseline that you're measuring from is whatever's out there that's open to traffic right now, plus whatever is programmed in the Transportation Improvement Program that ARC actually has dollars attached to it.
Right.
Anything else beyond that in adjacent plans or whatever, you can take those things, if they're not programmed in there, you can test them. We can throw them in the model and see how well they perform and see what happens with them. They're just not considered committed because they don't have dollars attached to them.
Right. But I could see how that could make a big impact. I mean, if there was, if Forsyth had a 4-lane highway going through the top right above Milton, that's going to really ease the pressure on Milton in Fulton County. So, at what point do you include that in the modeling? And what are we going to be voting on in a upcoming meeting? So I can be clear on how that would affect that particular
when we get
decision.
to the December 21st meeting, and you will have seen it several times before then, so by then it'll be well known to you. But you'll have a plan that includes both policy statements. It sort of gives the picture of here's where we are and here's where we want to go, and it does it both at a policy level and a project level. So it'll talk about the things. Remember back to the original, one of our first meetings with you is to talk about the vision statement. Here's what Milton wants to be. We're going to be, we should be able at the end of this to take this whole CTP and say, hold it up to that and say, now, are we meeting our vision? Are we achieving our goals? Are we meeting our objectives that are going to achieve those goals? That's what we should be able to do, but we'll be doing it both through policies as well as projects, specific projects. Then that document will enable you to have a tool to go to ARC and GDOT and other funding agencies and say, we've got our analysis done, we're ready to go, we know what our needs are, and we know what we're trying to accomplish.
But just so I'm clear, will those recommendations that come from you contemplate the transportation plans of other municipalities around us? Even stuff that's not necessarily funded? Because if they have in a 10-year plan that they want to do all these things, I know it might not be funded, but it could make a big difference on what we need to proceed with, especially in terms of putting a cut through where we have to take down houses.
We can run it with the 2030 Envision 6 plan is everything that's in the regional transportation plan, which could include different projects from neighboring areas. I mean, we've actually been trying to find Alpharetta's transportation plan to see if things like Rucker Road are actually in
already programmed.
Already programmed. So
And it may not make a difference, and that would be good for us to know.
It would be good to know, and we will know that before we ever come to you with a final plan. We were just trying to go ahead and start getting the concepts in front of you tonight so you could see the direction that we're heading in, so that if you wanted to go, are you guys crazy? You had the opportunity to do that tonight, or if you want to say, this is making sense to me, let's keep at it, then that's what we needed to do as well.
even things like 400, the HOV lanes on 400 are not in this base plan. So that's one thing alone that could have a really large impact on travel.
And the answer to your question, I'm not trying to be evasive, is both yes and no. Again, we try to include the things that are actually programmed, because those are the things you can count on to actually affect you, versus things that are kind of like you've been talking about them for 25 years and they've never happened, and so you don't need to. But we can test for those things. We can analyze for those things, and we can tell you what would happen. So.
Can I ask a question? With regard to the meetings that you'll have for public comment, how will you present to the citizens, the typical citizen that doesn't understand all that's going into this? Because this is magnanimous. I mean, when you look at all that impacts what our plan might be, which is so critical to us, and then all of the surrounding areas. One citizen may come before you and say, oh my gosh, how in the world could you possibly do a cut through that's going to take down homes? However, they're not seeing the complete big picture. How will you, preface that? How will you present that to them? Is that a formal presentation? Is it just little vignettes of discussion?
We have had small group meetings already with different groups. For example, the Disabilities Committee, we met with them just a few weeks ago to get their input into needs within the community, and to talk about some of the kinds of things we were thinking about and how did that how well did that meet those needs. In the schedule that you see left, we have a number of different opportunities to both receive public input and present to the public, whether it's at a meeting like this that's open to the public or whether it's at the Milton Roundup. The public opinion survey is a very interesting tool to use because you're not just getting the citizens that turn out to speak out vocally, but you're going to get a very scientifically representative sampling of what do people think about the kinds of recommendations that are being currently considered. And you'll have that input back to you to be able to gauge. And we hear everybody's input, but to your point, you know, sometimes you can get one person who's very much opposed, and we have to explain to that person why we understand their concern, but the transportation improvement is still very much warranted, and here's why.
Any other questions? Clarifications?
I think I heard you say that you guys are not planning anything that takes down houses. I think we've heard it. I just want to clarify that right now you're not proposing anything that's going through neighborhoods
We're
and taking
avoiding
out.
developed areas.
I just think that was important.
It's hard. You need to understand, too, at this level, we couldn't tell you if we're going through a house.
Right. So
This is at such a conceptual level that I'm sure somebody could look at some of those. I was actually very nervous about throwing scenarios 1 through 5 up there tonight because I kept saying, be sure and say several times as you're putting that up there. Now, don't get worried about anything you're seeing here. We just want you to see what all we've been looking at, what we've
Well,
been
and
considering.
that was my point about citizens, you know, how you present this to them. You know, if I was sitting in the audience tonight and heard my street name, for example, and I didn't really understand what the planning process was,
Right.
who you guys are, how much is going into this, may not have garnered that from this short discussion, and I'd be thinking, what in the world are they doing? So, I mean, you know, again, we talk about communication, and I think that's going to be critical in these little vignettes.
And just thank you so much also, because the more often we can get these updates, because we all get questions so often, and it's really helpful. Just to me, the more frequent we get updates, the more able we are to then communicate positively and proactively with the folks that have questions.
Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you. We appreciate
Being with us and presenting that. Thank you. All right, Mr. City Manager, do you have any more?
That's it,
reports?
Mr. Mayor. Just
Okay.
motion and a second for executive
Do
session.
do I have a
Can I ask
motion?
one quick question,
Yes, ma'am.
please? Where are we with our survey? The one that you, that went out not long ago?
Yeah. Matt's, I know I looked at what was almost the final product as recent as the end of last week, so I want to say we're within just days of being ready.
Yes, we took into account the suggestions that y'all made and incorporated that into the questions that we prepared. I've kind of got the final document at this point, and we're on a July 27th timeline for turning in all the materials for them to start the process.
Okay, and then it'll be 6 to 8 weeks in the field? Okay.
So hopefully right around.
For some reason, I thought we were further ahead, but I'm probably getting ahead of myself.
Well, we were further ahead, and then we started to really dig into the questions and really analyze the free-form questions from some of the other cities, as well as answer a fairly comprehensive questionnaire that the National Citizen Survey they didn't give to us at first, and all of a sudden we got this book to answer questions before we could get our survey instrument actually to them. So it's been a very good process. It's just been a little bit more cumbersome than we initially thought.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Do I have a motion and a second to adjourn into executive session to discuss litigation?
I make a motion, Mr. Mayor, that we adjourn into executive session to discuss matters of pending litigation.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion by Councilmember Diaversa, second by Councilmember Bailey, that we adjourn at
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye. Move into executive session.
My mic on?
like to reconvene our meeting. Do I have a motion that we reconvene?
I move to reconvene the regular meeting.
I'll second
I
it.
have a motion by Councilmember Lust, second by Councilmember Thurman.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting reconvened.
Okay. At this point, I will close this meeting. Do I have a motion to conclude this meeting?
So
I move
moved.
to adjourn the regular meeting, City Council.
I have a second. I have a motion by Councilmember Lust, second by Councilmember Diaversa. We adjourn.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned, 8:14.
Thank you.